All right. All right. Welcome back, everybody. I hope you enjoyed a short break. Very happy to see that everybody is still on and active here. We're going to continue on the track that we've already started on. I'm going to continue to talk a bit more about the resilience and how we can apply some of the learnings from cyber attacks and apply that internally to look at our processes and look at how we utilize our technology and how we educate our organizations as well. I talked about attack surface management and I talked about, the anomaly detection and all those fancy words for something you can do before something really bad happens. But eventually, a lot of organizations are going to meet the reality where something really bad actually happens to them. And in a minute, I'm going to switch over and share with you some insights from one of the recent ransomware attacks that we were involved in helping an organization with, and I'm going to share some of the thoughts from the organization as well, and some of the concerns. And hopefully you can utilize that to be a bit more proactive in your approach as well, and have that conversation with your C-levels as well and your boards of directors. But if I start out with that, let's tie it into when the attackers, the threat actors, have breached our systems. They're already in now, and they're moving laterally, as I said. They're being able to continuously change their behavior in the system when they scour for data. So they're going to be looking for the data inside your organization. And when I say data here, this is where it's important that we know and understand what is valuable to us, to our organization. So it's not just data. Any organization today has masses of terabytes, right? And the attackers are not going for all of that data because it doesn't really make sense for them. What they are after is the one bit of data that is more valuable to them and to you. So if they actually succeed in exfiltrating that data, they can put pressure on you, and that's the ransomware model. Then they can put pressure on you to pay that ransom demand that they're going to come with, right? So for them, they're constantly evolving their technologies, their methodology as well, and the tools that they utilize to search through the vast amounts of data that you might have. And they search for those valuable assets. You already know or have a pretty good idea of what valuable data means to you, whether it's PII or it's intellectual property, so IP, the reversed PII. So they're looking for that. That is a constant element. But they are actually being so professional. So they're looking at the organization that they had success in breaching. They're looking at the business strategies. Where is that business trying to be in 1 to 5 years from now? They're looking at the business partners. They're looking at the ecosystem, so all of the suppliers working with that organization as well. And they're that professional in investigating the business that they've now breached. The reason for that is they can narrow down their search for that valuable data, because now they can start looking for supplier-specific contracts or that particular piece of data that ties an organization to another organization in a potential merger or acquisition state. So they're looking for very specific data elements inside your organization. And if you're not in control of that data, if you don't have the visibility in where that data is placed internally, rest assured the attackers are going to find it anyway. So you need that visibility, that's for sure. That is one of the proactive elements you can apply here. Understand the data value, know where that data resides, where it's being processed, and where it's being transferred. So every time you move that data, you have to apply some level of risk assessment to that as well. Is that going to increase your risk exposure, or is that going to decrease your risk exposure? And do you then have the proper security measures in place to take care of that? So the first element, as I said, when the attackers actually breach your systems and they search for that data, what is the second element they're going to do? Well, now they're going to exfiltrate it. So they're going to extract that data, move it to some temporary servers that they have set up somewhere in the world. And this is, again, where we look at the proactive measures. Are you capable of today, with your technology and your processes and your skills in the organization, are you capable of detecting that sudden move of valuable data? So again, back to having the static view of your assets, like we talked about previously. In the OT environment, you can have a CMDB, that is the passive stance, but do you also have an active asset inventory? Do you have an active data asset repository where you can see your valuable data, they're now being moved? This employee ID, for instance, not particularly this employee, but that employee identity is all of a sudden starting to transfer data that they've never touched before to a brand new location. Are you able to detect that? And are you able to stop that from happening? Because if you are, then that is definitely, knocking out a will in the attacker's approach. If you're not able to detect that, and this is what we're unfortunately still seeing in many organizations, the attackers is going to be successful in extracting the data. And they do that, using various techniques. They do encrypted tunnels, so IPsec tunneling, actually small VPN servers almost running internally in your organization, being used to transfer that data outside to hide it even more from you. They're also using traditional data storage points as the destination point, so they can be using an Amazon bucket for storing it temporarily, that data, before they transfer it off to their own servers. But sometimes they use their own servers. So you have to have the ability, as I said, to be able to detect and deter that. That's one thing. But what do you then do? Because the attacker's next step, and you all know this, I'm certain of, is they're going to encrypt the valuable data to you, right? So when they start encrypting that data, you need the capability to be able to dive in and see the processes. And this is where context becomes key in your detection platforms that you operate today and your processes. You need to understand the context of when a new process is started at an endpoint or in the network, something new is happening. Because when you apply that context, you should be able to immediately identify that this is something that should not be happening. Encryption should not be happening at a file state level at a server unless it's instantiated by an administrator from an administrative work point, under privileged access and all of that measures you can have in place for that. So when you have that context and you see that, you should be able to act and block that encryption. If you don't, and the attackers are successful, they have now control over your data. And this is where the really, really hard conversation comes into play. What are we going to do now? How much data do they have? Do we even know if they have the data? Did they succeed in getting the extract all the way? And do they know what they have? That is a question I've been getting a few times. When a CEO comes up and says, yeah, I think I know what the attackers stole from us. But do the attackers know what they have? And let's just use one of the key phrases that I've used very much in my past in the military services as well, also in Maersk. If you assume the worst, then you're actually in a good spot here. So just assume that the attackers know everything about you. They even know you're having that conversation right now with a cybersecurity partner. So assume the worst and then work from there. So yes, the attackers probably know that they have something that's very valuable to you. And you're going to see that pop up when it's ransomware. You're going to get that ransomware demand. And the trend that we've seen is, and you probably know this as well because it's been in the media a few times, the ransomware demands are increasing heavily. All over the globe, you're going to see a constant rise in the initial demand. And we all know the reason for it, though some of us haven't voiced it yet. But we all know that the reason for that initial demand is they're also very skilled in negotiations. And they are expecting you to go into negotiations. So they're waiting for you. And that's also why today you get a bit more time than you did 5 years ago when ransomware happened, or 3 years ago. Today you get a bit more time to fire up your processes, get your own negotiator in place, to have that communication with the threat actors. So they're expecting you to negotiate the price. And then what happens? You start negotiating the price, and the advice is always for any organization, you do want to go into negotiations. Whether or not you intend to pay or not, that's sometimes a personal perspective from the board of directors and C-level. Sometimes it's an organizational perspective, and they can be based on many things. So I'm not going to dive into that because that's going to differentiate all over the world. And there's a lot of culture into that as well. So that's a discussion you're going to have internally. But going into negotiation is definitely a recommendation. And the reason for that is you have the ability to learn a lot from the threat actors. For instance, you can ask them, how did they breach the systems? Just to confirm that what you've seen is the right thing. And if you haven't seen it, you get a good idea of where are you vulnerable. Potentially, you can also get them to ease a bit up on the details around, are they actually able to decrypt files if you were, in fact, to pay the ransom? And that is a critical element, right? Because what they are asking you to do is pay the ransom and trust us. I mean, it's similar to if someone breaks into your house and then he comes back and says, you don't have to replace the lock on the door because I'm not going to do it again. Okay, yeah, do you trust that, right? So there's a trust element in here that definitely shouldn't be there when we're talking to organized criminals like this is. All right, so you go into that negotiation phase and you do that to learn a lot. And now I'm going to tie it into some of the biggest takeaways of the past year that we've had working with all these different and working against all these different threat actors that we see out there. I mentioned it briefly previously. We've seen over 130 active threat actor groups out there, with 100 of them being live simultaneously, exploiting all the vulnerabilities that you see out there. And, the key learning for any organization is back to the resilience element. Do you have a backup in place? I know it sounds too classic to be true, but a lot of organizations, and it ties into the data value. If you haven't realized, the value of your data, where it resides, that piece of data, how it moves, who accesses it, why do they access it, for what do they access it? Is it just users? Is it applications? Is it services? What is accessing that data? If you don't have that visibility, are you then capable of doing a backup that you can use if something really bad happens? Because the organizations who are well prepared for the loss of access to that data, whether it's from system failure or a cyber attack, the organizations that are really well prepared, they often have, like a full backup of all their data. But have they then tested their recovery processes as well? And are they in control of that backup repository? Or is someone else now all of a sudden in control of that backup repository? Because one thing I didn't mention, that during the lateral move, the threat actors are not just looking for the data sets, they're also looking for the backup repositories. And they're looking for that particular service account that you all use in your organization in different areas of your technology arenas. You use a backup administrator or a backup service account or something called something with backup in your identity repositories. Imagine what an attacker does as soon as he sees that. He's going to take that and he's going to follow all the activities. They can also read the logs of the systems. So they look exactly at where does that backup account move, what data does it touch, where does it move the data to, and then they go for that data as well. So when I say backup, I have the same methodology that I've had for many years in the defense. We use the phrase 3-2-1 as a way to describe how you set up barbed wire when you protect your perimeter in a military camp outside national borders. 3-2-1 means in the bottom you have 3 layers of barbed wire, then 2, and then 1 at the top, and that makes it really hard to move through it. That's a strong perimeter. But in the backup world, 3-2-1 is different. 3 means always have 3 copies of data. 2 means always in 2 different locations. And 1 means at least 1 copy should be offline. So not reachable by the network, because that makes it really hard for the attackers. And that ties me back to what I also mentioned. Organizations today taking full backup of all the terabytes that they might have of data is probably not a good idea. Just think about the recovery time. You might have a service level agreement that says, yeah, we can help you recover your data in 24 hours. But that depends on the amount of data, right? I've seen very bad examples of service level agreements, never been tested in that arena. And I've tried to do a bit of verification on them. And one time we had a service level agreement of 24 hours, but it took 71 hours and 40 minutes to restore it. So 71 minutes and something, or 71 hours and some minutes to restore it is probably not that bad. But imagine if you go across the entire organization for all the different business functions, there might be areas where that actually causes you to lose a license to operate or something worse. So a bit back to some of the statistics, and I'm cautious of time here because we have a very interesting speaker coming up. But some of the statistics we've seen is if the mean time to detect a ransomware attack is approximately 23 days in an organization, they have plenty of time to do all this discovery in your organization and understand how you move. And they actually take their time to understand the processes you apply as well. So as I said, they look at your backup systems as well. But that is also where they create backdoors in your system. They make sure that they can reconnect. So even if you detect when they first came in and how they did that, they're going to have a backdoor in there that allows them to reconnect at a later point in time. Because maybe you just say that, okay, we have a backup, we're never going to pay them, so we don't care about that. And if that is a statement from the organization, they might actually leverage that backdoor and go in and then take out the backup as well if they haven't already done it. So there's a bit of thing here about the negotiation part as well. Make sure you partner with someone who has the negotiation skill rather than trying to reach out to the threat actors yourself. All right, I'm going to pause that conversation right there, and hopefully it resonates with some of you. Hopefully there's a few good points in there that you're interested in diving in deeper, and I'll be more than happy to answer any questions and comments around that, also at a later stage.